No Country for Old Men is a great movie with a confusing ending. After a thrilling and violent series of events centering on the loss and retrieval of drug money, we are left with an old man at a kitchen table narrating some dreams about his father that seem completely unrelated to the preceding events. My aim in this video is to use some passages from the Bible and from the original Cormac McCarthy novel on which the film is based to explain what I think is going on with these dreams and why I think the ending is essential to the movie's being as great as it is. So as you'll recall, the plot of the film centers on an ordinary guy, Llewellyn Moss, who stumbles across some drug money and discovers that this lucky break isn't so lucky after all. He is relentlessly pursued and eventually killed by Anton Chigurh, an incredibly compelling and disturbing freelance hitman who lives by a perverse but seemingly consistent set of rules. Meanwhile, an elderly sheriff named Ed Tom Bell tries to intervene to protect Llewellyn and his loved ones, but ends up being a largely helpless onlooker to the ensuing violence and carnage. In this, he is not unlike us in the audience. As we will see, this I think is a significant fact in understanding what's going on with the dreams. In some respects, the film fits the mold of thrillers involving ordinary people stumbling into a criminal network that they don't fully understand, but it transcends that genre and ultimately has a deeper existential significance. This is in part thanks to the dreams, as we'll see, but it's also in no small part thanks to the villain, who, like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees or some other unstoppable slasher film killer, seems to embody some superhuman force. Like those slasher villains, he doesn't seem to have normal human motivations, and is unfazed by obstacles that would debilitate an ordinary human being. He kills with the indifference, as well as the implement, of a slaughterhouse worker, killing livestock, determining people's fate with the flip of a coin, and carrying it out with an inhuman and unrelenting logic. On one level, he seems to embody a deep fact about the ways in which the universe, whatever laws ultimately govern it, can often seem to be indifferent or even hostile to human flourishing, in ways that are consistent and ultimately meaningless. On another level, and this is somewhat clearer in the book, he seems to embody an impersonal and inhuman money-making logic that we see at work in the underground drug world, as well as the above-ground corporate world that seems to be implicated with and sustaining it in the background. As we will see, this second dimension of the film is important to the first dream, while the more general first dimension is essential to the second. Before turning to the dreams, I would like to quote a passage from the novel that explicitly highlights the death-dealing quasi-demonic forces unleashed by systematized greed. Obviously, the drug dealers who are killed in the shootout kill for money, as does Anton Chigurh, and it is greed that draws Llewellyn into the underworld that will eventually kill him and his wife and a whole bunch of other people along the way. Towards the end of the novel, as he reflects back on the horrifying events he has just witnessed, the sheriff addresses this dynamic by invoking mammon, which in the Bible represents the worship of money and material goods, either symbolically or in the form of a literal demon. The following passage from the Gospel of Matthew is a famous example. "But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon." With this and related Bible passages somewhere in the back of his mind, the sheriff says the following after discussing the case with a prosecutor, drawing a clear parallel between Mammon and Anton Chigurh, who is referred to here as the mystery man. "Finally, I asked him if he knew who Mammon was, and he said, 'Mammon? Yes, Mammon.' 'You mean like in God and Mammon?' 'Yes, sir.' 'Well,' he said, 'I can't say as I do. I know it's in the Bible. Is it the devil?' 'I don't know. I'm going to look it up. I got a feeling I ought to know who it is.' He kindly smiled and he said, 'You sound like he might be getting ready to take up the spare bedroom.' 'Well,' I said, 'that will be one concern. In any case, I feel I need to familiarize myself with his habits.' He nodded, kind of smiled. Then he did ask me a question. He said, 'This mystery man you think killed that trooper and burned him up in his car. What do you know about him?' 'I don't know nothing. I wish I did. Or I think I wish it.' 'Yeah. He's pretty much a ghost. Is he pretty much one, or is he one?' 'No, he's out there. I wish he wasn't, but he is.' He nodded. 'I guess if he was a ghost, you wouldn't have to worry about him.' I said that was right, but I've thought about it since, and I think the answer to his question is that when you encounter certain things in the world, the evidence for certain things, you realize that you have come upon something that you may very well not be equal to. And I think that this is one of them things. When you've said that it's real and not just in your head, I'm not all that sure what it is you have said. Nice little rhyme there, as we see a rhyme between Mammon and the Mystery Man, Anton Chigurh. So here we see a clear parallel between Mammon and Anton Chigurh that goes to the second half of the passage. And there's an interesting uncertainty about his ontological status. He is real and also just in our heads, which is to suggest that maybe the problem is that, to invoke the standard horror trope, the calls are coming from inside the house. There's a spirit in and working through us and the world that is evil, and in some sense just in our heads, but no less real for all that. Insofar as Mammon is understood to be a demon, he is a servant and agent of broader evil forces aligned with Satan. Similarly, and to return to what I was saying before, it seems that Anton Chigurh is both an embodiment of this particular form of evil, as well as a representation of evil more broadly. One of the central tasks of the film is to make us confront the reality of this evil and to raise the question of how we ought to live in relation to it. And the sheriff, who's largely a spectator of the action, despite his efforts to intervene, is here a stand-in for the audience, and the task with which the film presents the audience. And his dreams and narration of those dreams are the central vessel through which that effort to make meaning of and wrestle with this seemingly meaningless suffering is presented. So let's turn to the dreams. Let's start with the first very brief dream.
Anyway, the first one I don't remember too well, but it was about meeting him in town somewhere, and he gave me some money. I think I lost it.
Here we see, quite simply, the sheriff's indifference to Mammon. That's a simple take, but I think that is the key thing that's going on here. He just doesn't care that much about money, and is more attuned to and interested in his father, who, as we will see, seems to be a potential stand-in for God. In this, the sheriff is contrasted with Llewellyn, Anton Chigurh, and many of the other characters of the film. He is simply less susceptible to the wiles of this dark force in the world, which protects him to some extent and allows him to direct his attention elsewhere. Now let's turn to the second, more memorable dream, which on some level shifts the focus from Mammon to God, or at least the longing for God.
The second one, it was like we was both back in the older times, and I was a horseback going through the mountains of the night, going through this pass in the mountains. It was cold, and there was snow on the ground. He rode past me and kept on going, never said nothing going by, just rode on past. And he had his blanket wrapped around him and his head down. When he rode past, I seen he was carrying fire in a horn, the way people used to do, and I could see the horn from the light inside of it, about the color of the moon. And in the dream, I knew that he was going on ahead. He was fixing to make a fire somewhere out there in all that dark and all that cold. I knew that whenever I got there, he'd be there.
Before unpacking this dream, I would like to quote two brief Bible passages that I think are in the background and helpful in understanding the hope and challenge and question that this dream raises. So No Country for Old Men takes place both literally and metaphorically in a hostile wilderness. And the first passage I want to invoke refers to the Israelites' journey for 40 years through the wilderness in search of their new home. They've been liberated from enslavement to Pharaoh in Egypt, and they are on their way, or so they believe, or so they've been told, to the Promised Land, to be able to lead a better life elsewhere. They are guided on this journey by God, who appears to them as a pillar of fire that is obscured by and glows through a cloud of smoke. As they wander through the desert for years and years and years, many are inclined to despair and fear that they will die a meaningless life out here in the wilderness, and that they never should have left in the first place. And the generation that leaves Egypt actually never makes it to the Promised Land. Moses himself doesn't make it to the Promised Land, but the next generation does. And so this arrival in the Promised Land is made possible by these people continuing to follow God, even though they're not going to actually make it to the destination themselves, but their children will. So the following passage is a passage in which Moses is sort of narrating all of this to the Israelites. And here God is presented as a father figure, very similar, it seems, to the sheriff's father in the dream. The Lord your God, which goeth before you, he shall fight for you, according to all that he did for you in Egypt before your eyes. And in the wilderness, where thou hast seen how that the Lord thy God bare thee, as a man doth bear his son, in all the way that ye went, until ye came into this place. Who went in the way before you, to search out a place to pitch your tents in fire by night, to show you by what way you should go, and in a cloud by day. Now obviously in the dream, the sheriff's father also goes ahead with an obscured flame that glows in the night, in order to search out a place for his son to pitch his tent and warm himself in a cold, hostile world. And because his father blows past him without saying a word, the sheriff has to trust that that's what he's doing, and that if he keeps following in his father's path, there will be some kind of consolation up ahead. This motif is echoed in the New Testament, where Jesus tells his disciples the following soon before he is executed. Of course, in the Christian context, Jesus is understood to be God, so we have God again reassuring his followers. And like the sheriff's father, Jesus dies young. And Jesus also, of course, dies in a very brutal way that tends to induce despair in his followers. And so here he's trying to defend against that despair by reassuring them that however dark things get, there is a better future up ahead. If they maintain faith, if they don't abandon hope. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also, and whither I go ye know, and the way ye know. Both of these passages that involve this divine figure going ahead to prepare a place for us are aimed at summoning and sustaining faith that there's a better world up ahead if we stick to the path of righteousness, if we continue to do the right thing and maintain faith in the possibility of this better world and maintain faith with the values that guide us and don't despair in face of all the dark and the cold and the violence and despair that surrounds us. The Deuteronomy passage is obviously oriented more towards this world, whereas the New Testament passage seems to be oriented more towards an afterlife, but they're both channeling the importance of a similar kind of faith despite all the evidence that pushes against it. So there's a sense in which the sheriff is reconnected here with a love and faith that he'd forgotten about, and there's beauty in that. But then, as he says, he wakes up.
Then I woke up.
When he says, and then I woke up, he on one level is just concluding the story with the mundane, inevitable conclusion of every dream. The dream was over, and that was that. But the poignance of the scene hangs on the ambiguity of the phrase and the other thing he could be saying. He could also, after all, and simultaneously, mean that he woke up from a mere fantasy world to the real world, where there is no consolation but just the endless cold and dark. He looks to his wife, seemingly in search of reassurance, but she doesn't give any, simply returning his gaze until he looks away. And then it cuts to black, and we hear the clock ticking in the background. What's beautiful about this ending is precisely its knife's edge ambiguity. It articulates a powerful longing to believe that this world is or can be fundamentally hospitable to human life if we keep on the path of righteousness, do the right thing, even if the people around us are not. It's not naive at all about the world's seemingly senseless brutality and violence and the ways that despair and cynicism can seem like an appropriate response to them. But at the same time, it refuses to simply declare the despairing answer correct. It affirms the dignity and beauty of the faith stance that there is some countervailing force and ground for hope in the world, but in the midst of and without being able to decisively reject the alternative. It refuses to decide the issue for us and seems to affirm that the truth is somehow in the tension between the two. The felt need to reach for some kind of faith in a better world, along with the need to acknowledge all of the darkness that surrounds us. And when it cuts to black, it leaves us, the viewers, on our own in the theater, left to find our own way in the dark, as the clock continues its steady clicking.